Hi, Kim Lochner here again. As you probably know, I've been teaching BHP in Queensland, Australia for the past 4 years. My class is made up of 9th and 10th graders. I realise all our classrooms are different, but hoping there are some universal ideas that will apply to you and your students. When I was a kid, they always told us reading is fundamental. Still true. But there are some fundamentally different ways of reading. The challenge for many of my students was learning to read the way historians do, homing in on the right details without losing the big ideas. 3 close reads is a pretty simple way to help kids structure their reading and make clear decisions about what to focus on with each read. Now, I have to confess, when I was first teaching 3 close reads, I took it kind of literally. I made the kids read everything carefully 3 times. I received 0 World's Best Teacher mugs that semester. But as I got more practiced and talked to a lot of great teachers, I learned a different, less tortuous approach. The key for me is to make sure there is a clear question in students' mind as they read. That gets them to focus their attention on a particular dimension of the article. Let's face it, some of these articles can hit you with an avalanche of details at first glance. 3 close reads let students start with a snowball that grows larger at a more comprehensible pace, a few details at a time. I'm going to tell you how I teach 3 close reads, now that I've had some experience with the technique. I'll show you how to avoid turning this really effective tool into something you and your students dread. If you get this right now, things will be so much easier later on. As we know, all classrooms are unique. That applies to BHP classrooms as well. That said, reading is an area where we see a lot of important commonalities across classrooms. For students a couple of years or more behind grade level in reading, 3 close reads can help them anticipate challenges in concepts or vocabulary. It also helps students develop a mental model that supports reading comprehension. For students at or above grade level, this approach, it helps them clarify the focus of their reading. We introduce 3 close reads a little earlier in teaching big history, so I'm not going to repeat what you've already covered. Instead, I want to go into more detail on how I use it so I can give you a heads up on some of the challenges most BHP teachers notice. First of all, the name is ever so slightly misleading in that it isn't really 3 close reads. I think of it as 3 different levels of one rich reading experience. Students don't actually read through the entire document 3 times through. After poking around on Yammer, it became clear to me that I wasn't the only teacher who had misunderstood the practice this way. That's why I want to make that point super clear now. Really, it's more like 1.5 to 1 3/4 close reads. And I make sure my students get this as well. The first time students hear 3 close reads, I almost always get some sighs and grumbles and eye rolling, lots of eye rolling. So I often use a little buy-in activity to get students on board with the idea of reading something more than once. First, I ask the class, does anyone here play a sport? If so, stand up. Once all my athletes are standing, I ask them how often they practice their sport and for how long. It's usually very often and a lot of hours. Then I ask if anyone plays an instrument. More students stand up, and I ask them how much they practice. Maybe even more frequently and for more hours. I keep going until everyone is standing. Then I point out that reading real-world texts out there in the real world is something they'll be doing for the rest of their lives, and they usually begin to agree that a little extra reading might not be so bad. Before I get going, I make sure to prepare a question or idea for them to read against. Sometimes I use the unit driving question, other times I use a conceptual thinking question from the related lesson copy. I discuss the question or idea with my students before sending them off on their first read. That's how I do it. But if you have a different approach, I would love to hear about it on Yammer. Over time, as we move further along in the course, I get more creative with this box at the top. Sometimes I let students come up with their own question or idea, which I pre-approve, of course. Other times it can be a fun way to bring out different perspectives. Sometimes they give half the class one question to read against and the other half of the class another, and this usually results in some really interesting discussions about how people can have such different interpretation of the same historical account. Now, armed with a question or idea to read against, it's time to get started. First, a skim. I think of this as a quarter read. It's just so quick. It's like you can smell what's for dinner, but it's not time to eat. Second, a more traditional or whole read, where you dig in and take a few bites. The aim here is to help students understand the general content. Bear in mind that this is also when students examine asset level vocabulary, so they can work on understanding the specific words they don't know. Third, the thinking bigger read. This is another quarter read because it's more about responding to questions than actually reading the text again. One of my favourite professors used to ask, does this support, extend, or challenge your thinking? The third read is a chance to re-examine that question or idea they read against, which bring the process full circle. Now, if you'll bear with the metaphor, students can really start to digest the entire meal, to really take in what they've read. It's also a chance to re-examine articles and videos they've looked at earlier in the unit or in the course, to see if their perspective is different now compared to when they first learnt the material. There is a whole buffet of connected information. I shouldn't make videos when I'm hungry. So, to recap, the first read is more like a quarter read, the second read is a full read, and the third read is another quarter. So you get something like 1.5 close reads. Although I do want to establish this technique as a habit, I don't want to crush students' enthusiasm. So I've learned not to make every reading a close read at the beginning of the course. I've also learnt to read the room. If I see more than a couple of eye rolls, I try to figure out what's causing them. Are students getting frustrated with the process because it's hard, or are they getting good because they're bored? Once I've figured that out, I make adjustments. If they're frustrated, I give them more support. If they're bored, I might back off and not focus much on each read. The goal is for this process to be internalised so that eventually students do the 3 reads simultaneously. Okay, let's wrap up 3 close reads. Look, this practice is not something your kids will learn in a single session. That's why we built the progressions. Reading is a habit, and good habits don't form overnight. You'll have to remind your students and reinforce the habit throughout the entire course. As I get toward the middle of each year, I might do a couple of readings where I go back to the beginning and model 3 close reads all over again, kind of a refresher. Also, since they've had so much practice, your students will probably be better at it, and that builds confidence. That's it. Have fun. And if you ever have questions, come find me in Yammer. There's always a conversation around reading happening there.